Welcome back to Live from Paris. It's time for business, and I'm joined again by William. Hello, William.
Hi, Claire.
Now, we've been hearing a lot about those protests in Spain. The Spanish government, though, not only having to grapple with tough austerity measures, it's also got a fight on its hands to keep the country together.
That's right. Andalusia has become the third major region to ask for a bailout from the central government, increasing the pressure financially on them. Meanwhile, Catalonia has said it will move forward local elections by 2 years in what separatists hope could be the first step in a move towards independence. Perhaps the last thing that Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy wants to hear.
Anger in Madrid. Police charged crowds surrounding the Spanish parliament as anti-austerity protests flared on Tuesday night. They were calling for the end of the Rajoy government and a rewrite of the constitution, amid biting austerity measures that have left thousands of Spaniards on the breadline. Many are anticipating yet more belt tightening when the budget's announced on Thursday. As Madrid struggles to prove to Europe that it can cut its deficit, a number of Spanish regions are coming cap in hand to the government. Andalusia is asking for a €4.9 billion bailout after both Valencia and Catalonia appealed for funds, putting further pressure on Madrid to seek help from the EU. Catalonia is responsible for about a fifth of Spain's GDP, but it's also the most indebted region, and fiscal concerns here are mounting. The region's president has announced a snap election.
My government and I met with the president and announced the decision to dissolve parliament in the next few days. We decided to call elections on November 25th.
It's something of a referendum on whether Catalonia should break away from Madrid and seek greater budgetary independence. With separatist sentiment running high here, the outcome could have dramatic political consequences for Spain.
Honestly, considering the situation that we're in now, this is just adding fuel to the fire, and I don't think it's a very sensible thing to do.
The Catalonian vote may be the last straw for Rajoy's government. Madrid already dedicates over 60% of spending to pensions, unemployment benefits and servicing debt. There's precious little left over for Spain's cash-strapped regions.
And of course, in another display of anti-austerity anger, Greece is going to have a general strike today, the first one since that coalition government came in June. Protests expected, of course, as well.
All right, moving on to job cuts on the way for the car industry.
Yep, and this time it's Ford that's making the cut. It doesn't come, I suppose, as a huge surprise because the productivity levels of Ford's factories in Europe are pretty much lower than anyone else's almost. It's not known exactly how many jobs are going at the moment, but it's thought to be in at least the hundreds. They are expected to be voluntary redundancies at the moment, according to Ford management. They say that their experience of restructuring in the US in the last few years will help them manage the changes here in Europe. It's not great news, of course, though, what with Peugeot's difficulties at the moment, with the run-up to the Paris Motor Show, which starts later this week, the atmosphere is expected to be rather sombre.
And the news isn't any better for Japanese manufacturers.
Not at the moment, certainly with those protests, of course, anti-Japanese protests in China, which have sprung up across the country in the last week or so over those disputed islands, of course, which both countries claim. Japanese cars were burned, Japanese businesses were attacked, and now major Japanese manufacturers, Toyota, Nissan and Suzuki, they all say that they're going to pare down their production for the country, foreseeing that sales obviously will be hit by the ill will displayed there.
Now, French oil giant Total has made quite a surprising admission. Tell us about that.
Yes, in an interview with the Financial Times, Total's chief executive has been saying that drilling in the Arctic for oil is a bad idea. Actually, he says that an oil spill would be disastrous, I suppose unsurprisingly. But to hear this from an oil company executive is quite perhaps surprising. He says oil on Greenland would be a disaster. A leak would do too much damage to the image of the company, not to the environment. I suppose ironically almost, but it's in principle, he says he's not against the idea of drilling for oil there. He just says it would be really bad for PR if there was a massive oil spill in the Arctic. It's still, though, quite a division between Total and other companies such as Shell and ExxonMobil, who are going all out to drill in the Arctic, much of which is now having less sea ice as a result of global warming brought about by the burning of fossil fuels.
All right, and how the market's looking?
Not great at the moment. Let's take a look at how things are trading in Asia at the moment. General fears of a global slowdown really weighing on the markets there. Also, of course, those Japanese car producers helping to drag the Nikkei in particular down almost 2% there. Let's just take a look at how things closed in the US as well on Wall Street last night, and you can see that things were down in the same direction there after one of the Federal Reserve's board members questioned the policy of quantitative easing, how effective that could be.
Okay, time now for a look at some news in brief. Defence ministers from France, Germany and the UK are meeting today to discuss the proposed merger between defence giants EADS and BAE Systems. The three governments will try to reach a common position on the project, which each of them could veto.
Staying with aerospace, the EU claims the United States is still giving illegal subsidies to aircraft manufacturer Boeing. That's despite the US insisting that it stopped such handouts. Brussels says it plans to take the long-running dispute back to the World Trade Organization for arbitration.
And in London, the British Bankers Association has given up control of setting the LIBOR interest rate. That's after Barclays was fined hundreds of millions of dollars for trying to manipulate the benchmark earlier this year. It's likely that government regulators will play a part in setting the rate in future. Next, French winemakers are seeing red as a row brews over whether or not to allow US producers to sell some of their wines here in the EU using the Chateau label. Winemakers here in France argue their American rivals have no right to the label, that it amounts to cheating consumers, and that hundreds of years of craft are at stake. The EU said on Tuesday that it's delaying its final decision on the matter.
It's a battle over words that has the French turning the colour of a Bordeaux red with anger, all over the use of the word chateau by their American winemaking counterparts. But what's in a name? Well, the French argue a guarantee of quality, pedigree and hundreds of years of craft. In France, only wine from grapes grown on the property and made into wine in facilities there can be labelled as a chateau. While for US growers, a chateau wine can include grapes from vines that have been traditionally used by a wine producer or producer group.
The advantage of buying a Chateau wine from, say, the Bordeaux region is that you know what you're getting. You can go and see it. But with Californian or other wines, you don't know where the vineyard is.
The US claims there's no place for such restrictive practices in a globalised world. But the benefits of the country tapping into the European market are certainly clear. Though it's declining, the European Union accounts for 57% of global wine consumption. Last year, US wine exports to the EU brought in almost 370 million euros. Meanwhile, France wants to fiercely defend the value of its wines. Its exports made 7 billion euros last year for a country with an otherwise sluggish economy.
We're in a difficult discussion, and the position of the French government, my position from the start, has been to say no.
No may not be a word the French will have to explain as they take their battle of the wines to the European authorities. But it's likely their competitors over the Atlantic will have a few choice words of their own.
Moving on to some stronger stuff now, whiskey. It's being used to power cars.
Well, that's the plan, yeah, at the Tullibardine distillery in Scotland. In fact, when you produce whiskey, apparently 90% of the stuff that you get left over is not whiskey. And at the moment, the distillery pays £250,000 a year to get rid of this waste. But now a new project with Napier University in Edinburgh, they're seeing that material that's left can be used to feed bacteria, and that in turn makes butanol, which can be used to power cars. So if this project takes off, it could be an eco-friendly way of using up all that waste that comes from a lot of distilleries in the Scottish Highlands.
It's good that it's not going to waste. Thank you very much, William. And thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Stuart Norval will have the headlines in just a few minutes' time.